coming to you here from Chisinau, Romania, and we're looking in Zechariah, starting in chapter 9. We've been going through a series about the end times. Started the book of Joel. We've gone through a number of Old Testament as well as New Testament books already, studying about the end times, including the second coming, the rapture, and a little bit about the Antichrist. We will be going from Zechariah. My plans are to go from Zechariah to Revelation then, the book of Revelation. I've never done a teaching on Revelation before, but we have been studying it, and at least parts of it for years and years, but never as a whole book until just recently. And so, let's start with chapter 9. Here is Zechariah. It says, the oracle of the word of the Lord is against the land of Hadrach and Damascus and its resting place. So we just finished up talking about how in the early parts, chapters, God's judgment was coming on Jerusalem for their disobedience, but he also then, in this last chapter 8, in the latter part especially, began to talk about how he wanted to bless, and he would eventually bless the nation. And that is, he has, and he will even more. God has not written the nation of Israel off. I give a word of caution to you people who want to lay claim that the people in the land of Israel today are not the true Jewish people, inhabitants there. You better look at the history a little bit. You better look at how miraculous that nation came about, how miraculous it has stood against all of its neighbors. You look at the 6-day war, you look at all the other wars that they fought, and how God has miraculously delivered them. You better be careful. Now, they may be a mixture of people. Maybe they're not all. I don't know. And I don't think you do either. I'd be very careful, like I say. If you aren't careful, you might find yourself in that, along with that army, coming to take spoil in the book of Revelation. When it says God says he'll put a hook in their mouth and draw these armies to surround Jerusalem and even take it. Many will be taken captive before they eventually accept Jesus Christ as their king. And that will happen. And we'll see a little bit more about that in following verses here in Zechariah. But right now it's talking about the nations around Jerusalem. And this one particularly is against the place, the Tyre and Satin. And that's, Hadrach was an area north of, I think, just north of Damascus, nearby, and which sometimes included the Damascus area. So it says, the oracle of the word of the Lord is against the land of Hadrach and Damascus and its resting place. For the Lord has an eye on mankind. God is watching, and on all the tribes of Israel, and on Hamath also, which borders on it. Tyre and Satin, though they are very wise, Tyre has built herself a rampart, and heaped up silver like dust, and fine gold like the mud of the streets. And behold, the Lord will strip her of her possessions, and strike down her power on the sea, and she shall be devoured by fire. Tyre was basically an island just off the coast there of Israel, and they were just basically insurmountable. I think it's 13 years or something like that Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to the city and could not completely take it. It took Alexander the Great later on that came along and destroyed the city because of the difficulty he had taking it and lost so many of his men in conquering the city. But No one else could conquer it, really. It was just, when we talk about Assyria, you talk about Nineveh and the huge walls that they had, Babylon, the huge walls that they had, protection and that huge city, and the difficulty people had taken it. Actually, Jerusalem was a very, very difficult place to conquer. And the only way that, well, a couple of things happened that helped the Romans conquer the city finally. One is that, unfortunately, somewhat like we are today, there became divisions within the city while the Romans had it under siege. And you had a war going on inside the city walls among the different groups wanting control. And they failed to cooperate with one another. One controlled the storehouses of food, and eventually the other came in and was able to get in. And they set fire to the food supply. With the Romans outside trying, waiting to starve them out, and one army sets fire to this food supply. And of course it wasn't too long after that the nation fell. The city fell. People began to starve to death. And so we see today in the church, unfortunately, over different issues, division. We see this, I hate to even bring it up, but let me mention it. It needs to be. This notion of QAnon. Do I say it's all bad? Well, maybe not 100%. There's some good to it. They've got some good stuff that you find once in a while, some things that you wouldn't get from normal news sources. But all in all, it's turned into a cult, and it's been greatly divisive of the church. What I watched, from my perspective, was that some of these strong-headed people within the group put pressure on pastors to preach what they were telling them to preach. You either agreed with them 100% or you were sheep. And that's a derogatory term that they used. Well, I am a sheep of Jesus Christ. Now, yes, I can be a lion when I need to, but to use the term sheep is to me is a compliment or in reality, but they mean it as a derogatory statement that we just go to the slaughter and without saying a word. And there's a few, unfortunately, Christians like that. But I don't have to agree 100% with everything Q said. Like I say, there's some truth to it. Well, listen, Satan will give you some truth, but he'll mix some lies in with it. That's what makes it appealing. He'll hook you on the truth, but then he'll begin to feed you lies. That's the same thing Q does. And that's about enough said on that. It just has caused great division within the church because of that. And what really, I don't know if I started to say what really turned me off. I was turned off a long time before that because I've investigated deeply, and I found that many of its claims are false. Tries to make, there's a lot of unsavory characters that heavily involved in it, that have a lot of influence on it, and whoever is the head of Q failed to disavow themselves from them. Then you had this one that really should turn any Christian away from it. It was a video showing Donald Trump and JFK Jr., John F. Kennedy Jr., walking off into the sunset, leading the world into a new utopia type existence. Basically, they replaced Jesus Christ with Donald Trump and JFK. It wasn't Jesus Christ that's going to come back and set up his millennium kingdom. It was Donald Trump and JFK. That is blasphemy. That is heresy. So, you need to stay away from it if you're a child of God. They never disavowed themselves from it. Matter of fact, Q continued to, and many within the organization continued to use that video to promote the movement. So, that's what happened in Jerusalem. There was a division of who was going to have control, and they began to fight among themselves, and the city fell. The other thing was that led to the Romans being able to take it is that they spent, their whole army spent much time, months and months, filling in a whole valley so that they'd have a level field outside the walls to fight from. And that allowed them also to gain that victory. But Tyre, getting back to the subject here, Tyre was an island that was almost impossible, well fortified, and they ruled the sea quite a bit, but they weren't a threat to the many other places. Okay, well, why the judgment on Tyre? Because they rejoiced when Jerusalem fell. They rejoiced at the destruction of Jerusalem, so God said, your turn's coming. And it did. And so it says in verse 2, and on Hamath, which borders on it, Tyre and Satin, though they are very wise, Tyre has built herself a rampart and heaped up silver like dust, and fine gold like the mud of the streets. Yes, they were a very rich city. But behold, the Lord will strip her of her possessions, and strike her down, shall strike down her power on the sea, and she shall be devoured by fire. Now that didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen with Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar never fully conquered the city, even though he won, some things from the city that they would pay to the Babylonians, and but they just could not take it. They made life very difficult for them until they decided to basically pay up. But the city was not destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. It was later destroyed by Alexander the Great. Okay, verse 5, Ashkelon shall see it and be afraid, Gaza too, and shall writhe in anguish. Ekron also, because its hopes are confounded. The king shall perish from Gaza. Ashkelon shall be uninhabited. A mixed people shall dwell in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of Philistia. And that's these 4 cities just mentioned. They're all cities of the Philistines. I will take away its blood from its mouth, and its abominations from between its teeth. It too shall be a remnant for our God. Okay, did you catch that? Yeah, there's going to be destruction. But that last part of the sentence there, it too shall be a remnant for our God. It shall be like a clan in Judah, and Ekron shall be like the Jebusites. Then I will encamp at my house as a guard, so that none shall march to and fro. No oppressor shall again march over them, for now I see with my own eyes. So not only will these cities be destroyed and cut off, but there will be a remnant left out of them. And that remnant will become, basically as it says, a remnant for our God. It should be like a clan in Judah. So actually, they will become a part